What's good, y'all? It's your boy Chill G. No explanation needed. You know what's about to go down. Let's explain what's on my mind. Let's give some sober meds. So, I didn't really think about the aspect of um, the delineation of conscious hip hop from pop hip hop. Hip hop. The idea that the original movement of hip hop is to share stories of disenfranchised um, people of color or black folk, whatever way you want to describe us. I don't know the definition, the way we class ourselves, African American, Negro, whatever. Names are vast. But let's just say melanated people, people with darker skin, and considered descendants of slavery. That's a different discussion. But the whole idea is that these are our stories. This is our way of expressing post the trauma, right? So there's like there's a certain amount of tropes and stereotypes that can be seen or taken or used when it comes to speaking to that demographic, right? Because on average, we're speaking about people who, when you say the word disenfranchised, you're speaking to people who either living in poverty, don't have access to resources, don't have access to power to shape their own destiny and stuff like that. So this is kind of the discussion in terms of a political conversation, be able to be fiscally responsible for yourself, like all kinds of different ways this conversation kind of rears its head, right? So it's pretty straightforward. I think the unstraightforwardness of it is the fact that other cultures, white people, other races, can identify with the struggle. So, in a sense, that kind of unifies us all to enjoy what black folk are making, which is hip hop music. Other folks from other cultures kind of identify with the struggle and say, yo, I feel you, bro. Simple. So we can all rock our head to the music together. I think what's happened is so much years and like there's been so many years of ratifying hip hop culture through the stereotypes, right? Gangsterism, like being pro black, like the conscious side, the ignorant side, the ratchet, the classy, the upper class bougie nigga, the whatever. Like it's all been branded as these positions within the black populace versus how I think it really should be classed as just an American way of living, just an American lifestyle, regardless of race. You have Indian guys dressing and being like, yo, bro, and doing um, break dancing from the 80s before I was born. So I can't now talk to an Indian kid in front of me in 2024 say, yo, you're breakdancing, you're taking black culture, when there was an Indian guy also breakdancing in the 80s before I was born. I get it, everyone. No, it was predominantly created by, curated by. All right, we picking and choosing. We're getting into the pick and choose conversation. Because when we speak on the contributions of Jamaicans, right, we know that Kool Herc is the father of hip hop. That's clear as day. We know his parties basically sparked and was the entire inception of vibing to beats, to breaks, to chopping the beat and reverse looping it and getting break dancers to dance. They're called break boys or breaker boys or whatever the term was for these people dancing to how Kool Herc, a Jamaican youth, was taking his American immigrant POV of American culture and flipping it and presenting it to itself. So when you actually look at what the inception of hip hop is, it's actually an immigrant perspective of presenting y'all's art to yourself. At the end of the day, every person, every generation of American is an immigrant to some extent, unless you agree like me that the indigenous people, um, or black people are part of the indigenous class. So then you could have a different conversation. But just on like straight superficial, like we're all here in 2024. We all have delineations and mixtures of blood and all this type of stuff. I'm Jamaican mixture. Well, Drake is black, he's white. Kendrick is black. But when we look at the antiquities of what black means, you have folks who were black, but like, from South America black, that is from Caribbean black, that's from Africa black, that is like, so being black in itself doesn't necessarily mean you're American, right? Black is just a different kind of conversation race. I think I'm like basically breaking down obvious things to show how stupid the conversation has become in terms of where we are with hip hop. Because we know there's white people below and above the poverty line. We know there's white, Asian, all kinds of cultures, all kinds of races, every race, every culture that you could find in America, you could find at all status levels, all class levels, all economic levels. It's not something that's straight for black and white, like, oh, all white people's rich, all black people's poor. But for some reason, when it comes to the music and the tropes and the stereotypes that we play into, right, to create narratives and to create like angles of attack, especially in this hip hop battle that passed, I noticed that it was like this whole thing where it's like, come on, like Kendrick's the conscious guy and Drake's just a pop artist. Like he's not really making any music with substance. That was the go-to angle to be like, come on, of course. But then I was listening back to an old, um, I was listening back to 100. This is the Games record featuring Drake. And on Drake's verse, he was basically saying he would have more friends if it wasn't for success. He would have more friends if he stayed conscious and didn't go pop. He would have more friends, right? So that had me thinking, and I hope I don't lose the main thought because that was I wanted to introduce and get myself to this point before breaking down the thought. But it got me thinking, like, how do we, um, how do we think that black culture, right? Because Drake has apparently appropriated black culture, but he did not maintain conscious music. He said, okay, I started, but I switched. I went pop. So Drake going pop over the last how many years is still considered him appropriating black culture. But he didn't appropriate anything conscious at all. He says it himself. I appropriated everything that's popular. Right? If he's gone pop, he's speaking on topics that are popular in all households, whether you're black or not. He's speaking on topics that just general first world families can identify with, first world youth, first world men and women can just identify with. He's not speaking to interpolitical and economic situations and how they intersect and da 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 da. Like, and to think that if let me just stick this pin. If you think Kendrick is really speaking on that, you're as much of a sheep too, because Kendrick is as much pop as Drake. What Kendrick does, he plays the game even better. Now Drake played the game of pop, like pop hip hop, of like presenting topics that are considered stereotypically black in a form that you would be like, okay, we believe him to do it because of his blackness. It's not like the things that Drake did that was considered stereotypically black. We were like, oh, he's the white boy doing black stuff. No one has ever said that. No one was ever looking at the complex of Drake, of the brand OVO, this hip hopness of him was because he was close enough to black behaviors and black people and picked up those behaviors. No, everyone's literally saying nigga's half black himself. So of course he has the propensity to have and take on stereotypical black behaviors. So that in itself was the medium being the message. Now, years later, everyone's trying to pinpoint and say, Drake, you're appropriating. You were the person taking on these caricatures and using it to sell us an image that's not real. But we would also be participants. We can't get angry at the movie for presenting itself, and you were in the audience, paid and watched the movie, and then stayed there for 15 years watching the movie. So that's what it is. We all partook in this, if you want to say it's racism or appropriation, or this belief that the monolith of blackness was the appropriation of what Drake took on. The characters of what Drake took on was him appropriating blackness. That in itself is so racist. For you to think that every black person has to not be conscious, and I'm not gonna say that's the assumption. That's not the racist assumption. Let me properly word this. The racist assumption, the racial tone, is Kendrick saying, "You're not like us, yet you trying to be like us by doing these behaviors." So that creates the complex. Because if Drake was just being himself, you would just call him Drake. Drake's being Drake. You wouldn't say Drake's trying to be a black guy. He's a white guy trying to be a black guy. The complex of pointing that and making that a conversation piece creates the complex to even think like that. Because no one was thinking like that. The man is an individual. He's doing his own individual shit, just like me. To monolith us and say, this person behaved like that and this person also behaved like that. They happen to all be dark skin. So that means any and every person who behaves like that is a part of this culture is stupid. Let me bring it back to why it's literally stupid though. It's literally stupid because the antiquities of all our peoples, all our ancestors are tribal. We were small knit groups. We didn't have one large cultural identity. That's never been a thing. If you were Choctaw or if you were Arawak or if you're Yoruba, it doesn't matter what area of the planet we're speaking of indigenous people. Indigenous people never identified as indigenous people or black people. We identified as a group based on the region, based on the culture in that direct local region, right? And it so happened that things socialized around the world where a group of people migrated to another area and transferred cultures, and then certain things would be shared, or certain names or certain terminologies are now similar few thousands years later. That's inconsequential to my point that it doesn't matter. We're not a monolith. So you can't judge me based on Drake or any other black person. And the fact that Kendrick became the marker of saying, Drake, you're not black because you behave in a way that, to me, how I look at you, you're a white guy trying to be black, is so um, ignorant of the human experience. It's so ignorant of the breath, right? The width. They say the breath or the breath. Oh, that word's a weird word to say, but whatever. The size of experiences that an individual can have while they are here on this plane, while they're here manifesting life. You wake up every day behind your two eyes, but now someone else who's waking up every day behind their two eyes are gonna define what your experience is when we don't even have a definition for this shit. Everybody's living life based on previous folks who didn't know what the fuck they were doing when they were here. There's not, sorry for my language, but it's kind of, it's crazy how the beast flipped this whole thing on its head. You see videos of room full of, like, I just watched a video of a room full of white kids in Canada, actually at History, one of Drake's venues that he co-owns, singing Not Like Us, because DJ Scream, another white Caucasian DJ, is playing the song. And I'm like, the complex, the medium is the message, has really reared its head in this scenario, where folks are so blind to the actual conversation, what black people are even trying to say in hip hop. The original message of hip hop from the inception, from prior to Cool Herc, back Negro spirituals, okay? Let's go all the way back there. Let's go all the way to the inception of this soul music. This idea of soul music is Negro spirituals. It's taking gospel hymns and flipping them on their head to speak about freedom and to surpass your oppressor. That's really what it is. We're taking religious songs that's supposed to be about talking about the creator, and we're flipping on its head, and we're saying our experience. So already there's sacrilege happening in terms of the inception of soul music. The inception of soul music is completely against religious music. Even though it's using religious music, it's essentially appropriating a religious um, POV of attaining whatever higher consciousness or whatever the case may be. That's the whole beginning of this. This is the whole beginning of this. 1,000 years ago, or you want to call it 500 years ago, but realistically, that's where this thing starts. Then you grow, you get to, um, you get to jazz. Well, I'm skipping steps, but yeah, you get to jazz, you get to rock, you get to where we are now, where we have pop music. It's an amalgamation of all these eras of sound. And to me, when we know that black people invented all the rock, jazz, all black people were instrumental towards all of it. But this specific sound now, the violence that's necessary to be, I don't want to say like the violence, but it's like I made the point earlier that we appropriated, um, there was an appropriation of religious music, right? You know, wade in the water, God gonna trouble the water. We're really talking about escape plans to get away from the massa, right? But there's another era where we appropriated and it really helped build the culture, really helped build soul music to what we see it now, which is appropriation of gangsterism culture, appropriation of made men culture, appropriation of literal Italian and Sicilian immigrants. So it would make no sense to me that indigenous folk, FBAs, whichever way you want to classify them, would see immigrants coming into the country and how those men had to fight to make a way for themselves, how those women had to hold down their families to make a way. And then we appropriate that. And then for some reason, that has now in 2024 been classed as the stereotypical way of black behaviors. Gangsterism. Oh, you're too white to be gangster. It was white people who came into the country and projected the whole idea of being gangster, being self-made, made men. That all these terms, mafioso, mafia, gangster, all these things. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even remotely make sense. So let's bring it back to the conversation, right? Drake has appropriated black culture, which I've already proven has in itself appropriated from other cultures, right? From religious culture, from Italian, Sicilian cultures. We can go further. There's other cultures. We could talk about Wu Tang appropriating Asian cultures and putting martial arts. And yeah, we could have the back and forth. Well, every culture around the world, every inception of every people everywhere around the world is black. All right, I get it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if we want to go that angle, but it still doesn't negate the point that I made earlier that we're not a monolith regardless. So you can't claim what South Africans are doing if you're Jamaican, or if you're in Louisiana, you can't be claiming what they're doing in LA. It's the Pan Africanism movement is only to deter our enemies. It's not about claiming greatness. Your greatness is based on what you are doing individually. Anyway, so Mayu is there being accused of appropriating black culture because he's acting gangster. Gangsterism is a culture introduced by Sicilians and Italians, as well as the Jewish. The Jewish mob is a thing, and Drake is Jewish. So, so it's actually understanding the evolution of what it means to be white. That these other cultures weren't accepted into the in group, into the in white class. They had to fight and mob up and gangster up and do things to protect their own selves. And then eventually they got brought in. So if we know that, right? We know that that is the literal history of all these other immigrant classes coming in to create the what we call in 2024 in 2024 as white society, right? We know white society is made up of Jewish people, Italians, Sicilians, Irish, English, British. Like, come on, I can keep going forever. The amount of other cultures who 20, 30, 40, 100, 200 years ago would never consider or classify themselves as, not to say they're not Caucasian, that's phenotype, but they would never class themselves as European from the idea of like under the queen. They wouldn't say, "Oh, we God save the queen. We are British. We are white like her. We are of her." And I know white is a pretty new phenomenon because in ancient times that wasn't a thing. But just the idea of saying we are all one people just because we're light skinned wasn't really, that was never a thing, fam. That's a thing now. So let's bring all these complexes together, right? And let's see if we can kind of wrap this up. They used a black guy to point at another black guy, mixed guy, to say his behaviors are appropriated from his half black side. away from his half Jewish white side towards a culture that is made up of all cultures. There's hip hop music sampling Punjabi music. There's hip hop music sampling everything. Like everything is in hip hop. Everything that makes America America, the melting pot of America that makes America America, the multiculturalism of Canada that makes Canada Canada, and this entire history of this hemisphere, knowing that even before any of these places were countries, Jamaica was already one of the most like, multicultural melting potish spots on the planet. It was the heaviest. This Port Royal or Port Hope, whatever it was, the number one port in Jamaica, was the most traveled port in the entire hemisphere, in this entire hemisphere, like in all of the Americas. So back before Canada was a thing and it was called Quebec, it was called the Quebec colony. Before America was a thing and it was Virginia, and it was just these colonies or these companies, Jamaica was already booming. Jamaica was already a guy. Jamaica already had written history, written constitution, and we just forget. We forget that there was already something happening here. There was already a story, already a storyline. So now that America has become, which is the youngest guy, America was even stronger than Britain during majority of the history of America, right? Much less now, right? We have this perspective that we're number one. Our narrative is number one. Then we're number one, and our narrative is number one. Our propaganda, whatever we say, is going to be factually true. So now media narratives are presented. They're propagated through the internet. It's international. There's really nothing that could stop it, especially when all the major tech companies are in America as well. You get to a place where you're literally seeing the beast utilize archetypes that are supposed to be against the beast for the beast to fight other archetypes that are potentially on the fence or potentially as well part of the beast. Um, but you have to look at this main thing. A lot of people, and Drake said it himself, negate the fact that the man is actually black and his accomplishments should be seen as black accomplishments. When Obama stepped into office, they said first black president. The man is half white. Obama is as much white as Drake is. So if you're going to look at Obama and say first black president, even though technically there might have been a president, the original president of America, United States, was black. That's up for debate. But how are we not calling Drake's contributions to music, him getting Apple Music to sign and create a hip hop radio station? OVO Radio is a hip hop radio station. And prior to Drake and that business venture, Apple did not care about black music. They were signing U2 and whatever, all those guys. They were doing deals with that community. But Drake came in and they did that with him. And then after, they went and did with Nicki and with this person and that person. So post Drake, the corporate entities involving themselves with hip hop brands is a different conversation. So prior to Drake, they didn't even give a shit. Excuse my language. But they didn't care. They didn't care about us. They didn't like us. How MJ was saying, they don't really care about us. But post Drake, they're seeing the value. They're seeing how much money Drake literally helped push hip hop into the number one stream genre of all time. It started dwindling down. We know the numbers dwindled down over the last few years. But in this beef with Drake and Kendrick, it's now also again front page news, front page information for the tabloids, front page streams in terms of Not Like Us, front page, whatever you want to call it. Drake has always been keeping the hip hop, the black conversation, the conversation of what I said in the beginning, disenfranchised individuals sharing their perspective to say that blase, 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 right? Drake has heightened the awareness of that conversation. Drake has brought more eyes to the conversation. Now, whether you're going to say, oh, he's added to the conversation or he's taken away from that's a whole different debate. I'm not getting into that right now. We can have that. But in terms of just the entire idea of black business, black money, we ain't getting enough. We ain't getting enough of it. We don't have control of it. We don't have control of this. Drake got control. Drake is a black man. He got control. Like, I don't know. maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I really don't know at this point. One of my homeboys used to call me light skin when I was a kid. When we were kids, when we were younger. I'm fair skin. Drake's light skin, but my boy was dark skin, and it got me to truly understand. Because prior to him calling me light skin, I would have never thought myself different from him. But colorism is a thing, and it's really pervasive. It's pervasive in so many ways, and you see it. If we get away from racism and we start talking about classism, colorism, and elitism, I think we would actually hone in on the issues that are plaguing our world. And I'm gonna leave it there.